In the frozen stillness of Montana's winter, a forgotten mother dog curled her body around four shivering pups, waiting not for rescue, but for mercy. Nearby, a grieving widow thought her days of saving lives were long behind her, but when fate crossed their paths, something quietly powerful began. Not just survival, but healing. What started as a rescue turned into a rebirth for a woman, a soldier, and a dog who never stopped protecting. This is a story of second chances, of the family you don't expect, and the home you never knew you needed. The snow had been falling for 3 straight days, soft and heavy, blanketing the valley of Jackson Hollow in endless white. Winds moaned through the narrow pine ridges, carrying a frozen hush that clung to every rooftop and twisted branch. In this remote mountain town in western Montana, where the nearest neighbor was often a mile away, winter didn't simply visit, it ruled, stern and unforgiving. At the edge of the forest, nestled between a curtain of aspen trees and a frozen creek, sat a weathered log cabin with green shutters dulled by time. Smoke curled from its chimney, the only sign of warmth amid the vast, frost-bitten silence. On the porch, a woman bent forward slowly, shoveling snow with deliberate, practiced movements. Eleanor Whitmore, 67 years old, had the bearing of someone who had once been formidable and still wore the remnants of that strength like an old coat. Her back stooped slightly from years of work and loss. She had sharp green eyes behind round glasses, the kind of eyes that missed nothing. Her silver-gray hair was braided neatly down her back, and her hands, though veined and spotted, moved with the confidence of someone who had mended more than her share of broken wings and fractured paws. She was not tall, but she moved with an upright grace, her boots crunching steadily across the snow-covered porch. Eleanor had once been a wildlife rehabilitator, known in these parts for her calm and unshakable demeanor when handling even the wildest creatures. That was before her husband Walter passed away suddenly 2 winters ago, his heart giving out just as he was refilling the bird feeders out back. Since then, Eleanor had stopped answering calls from the rescue network, letting her name slip quietly out of circulation. She rarely went into town anymore, except to pick up feed and wood. Most days, she kept to her porch, her stove, and the slowly fading photographs on the mantel. This morning, however, there was something different in the air. The storm had abated just enough for a crisp clarity to return, though the wind still carried a fierce chill. Eleanor, tightening the thick scarf around her neck, paused in her shoveling. There it was again, a faint, strangled sound, not quite a bark and not quite a whimper, carried faintly through the trees. She straightened, holding still. The sound came again. Her breath misted before her and a strange tug in her chest. A long dormant instinct stirred her forward. She left the shovel leaned against the porch and headed toward the tree line. The snow was deep and clung heavily to her boots as she pushed past low branches. The sounds grew clearer, whines now, weak and close. A few more steps, and she saw it. At the base of a small hollow in the snow, just where the forest thickened, a form shivered violently beneath a half-frozen bush. Eleanor's breath caught. It was a dog, a husky by the looks of it, though its coat was so matted and crusted with ice that it was hard to tell. The animal was curled protectively around a bundle of movement, 4 tiny puppies, barely more than newborns, nestled against her ribs, mewling weakly in the cold. The mother's head was lowered, her ice-frosted ears flat against her skull. She did not snarl, nor bark, nor run. She simply looked up at Eleanor with eyes that were cloudy but clear enough to plead, "Please, mercy!" The husky mother, later to be named Maple, was no older than 4, though hardship had aged her. Her once thick silver and charcoal fur was matted with frozen dirt. Her frame was gaunt, bones pressing against skin stretched too thin. Her left paw was slightly raised, an old injury perhaps, and her breathing came ragged and shallow. Yet despite her frailty, her body remained a living barrier between the snow and her pups. Eleanor's heart, dulled and tired for so long, lurched into motion. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, slowly kneeling despite the pain in her knees. "What have they done to you?" She didn't reach for them at first. She simply waited, let the dogs smell her, judge her. Years of working with strays had taught her the value of silence and patience. After a long moment, Maple's nose trembled toward Eleanor's glove. She did not recoil. Gently, Eleanor peeled off her scarf and draped it over the pups. They wriggled beneath it, seeking warmth. Then, with deliberate movements, she slid her coat off and wrapped it around the shivering mother. The hike back to the cabin was slow and labored. Eleanor carried 2 pups in her arms, tucking them against her chest. Maple, bundled and supported, stumbled along beside her, the last 2 pups tucked into a satchel lined with her scarf. The mother's strength surprised her. Thin and ragged as she was, Maple refused to leave her young. Once inside, the transformation was quiet but profound. Eleanor stoked the fire high, laying thick blankets near the stove. She warmed goat's milk on the range and mashed soft meat into a broth. She worked in silence, methodical, as though her hands remembered what her heart had forgotten. Maple curled into the blanket nest, too weak to eat at first, but her eyes followed Eleanor. Trust was forming, not swiftly but surely. Later that evening, with the wind rising again outside, Eleanor sat near the fire with a mug of tea. The pups were curled up, tiny bellies rising and falling, content and safe for the first time in their brief lives. Maple rested, her eyes half closed but alert, ears twitching slightly when the wind howled. Eleanor stared into the fire, the flames reflected in her glasses. For the first time in years, she whispered aloud, "Walter would have called you a miracle." She didn't expect a reply, of course, but as the fire popped softly and the snowstorm rebuilt itself outside, Eleanor felt something, like the faint pulse of life returning to frozen earth. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. Somewhere deep in the woods, a life had chosen not to give up, and in a house that had long been too quiet, that choice lit a flame Eleanor didn't know she still had.
The morning sun crept in reluctantly, brushing the frost-draped windows of Eleanor Whitmore's cabin with pale light. Outside, Jackson Hollow still lay beneath a quilt of snow, the fir trees heavy with white, their branches occasionally shrugging under the weight. A soft wind swept through the hills, not harsh, just enough to whisper across the silence like a reminder that winter still held the valley in its palm. Inside, the warmth from the wood stove pushed back the cold with quiet persistence. Maple, now wrapped in Eleanor's old patchwork blanket, lay curled at the hearth, her breathing steadier, though still shallow. Her 4 pups, 1 black, 1 cream, and 2 mottled with gray and white, nursed noisily, tiny tails twitching. Eleanor, dressed in a thick flannel shirt and denim apron, crouched beside them with a small bowl of goat's milk and broth. Her hands moved gently, steadily, their muscle memory reawakened from long sleep. She hummed a soft tune, something her husband Walter used to play on the old banjo, long since tucked away in the attic. Eleanor had not yet named the pups. It felt premature, like naming wildflowers before they'd broken through snow. But the name had come easily. Maple. It had slipped from her lips instinctively, drawn from the tree out front, whose broad limbs had shaded Walter during long summer afternoons. Maple, with her quiet endurance and the scars hidden beneath her fur, seemed to echo something Eleanor couldn't yet voice. Mid-morning, a rhythmic crunching sound broke the quiet. A vehicle approaching, tires biting into compact snow. Eleanor glanced toward the window, brow furrowed. Visitors were rare. She rose with some difficulty and stepped onto the porch just as a rust-red pickup truck pulled up near her gate. A man stepped out. Tall, mid-30s, lean with broad shoulders under a thick wool coat, his boots dusted white from the short walk from the truck. His sandy brown hair was slightly tousled beneath a beanie, and a light stubble covered his jaw. He walked with a slight favoring of his left leg, though it didn't seem to slow him much. "Morning," he said, offering a small, polite nod. "You must be Mrs. Whitmore. Name's Travis Morgan. Sheriff Dixon said you might need some firewood out this way." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. "I put the call in 2 days ago. Didn't think they'd send someone young enough to be my son." Travis chuckled softly, not unkindly. "Just moved up here last month. Trying to be useful while I figure things out." He carried himself with the quiet steadiness of someone used to being in dangerous places, someone who knew how to move without startling others. His eyes, a clear gray blue, held the kind of sorrow that didn't announce itself but never fully left. Eleanor studied him a moment longer before stepping aside. "Well, come on in. Wood's through the back. Watch the steps, they get slick." As Travis moved around the cabin, he caught a glimpse of Maple through the window. He paused, hand resting on the rail. "That your dog?" "Not exactly," Eleanor called from behind him. "She found me yesterday. Or I found her. Guess it depends how you look at things." Travis said nothing for a beat, then nodded and continued toward the woodpile. Over the next hour, Travis stacked logs neatly in the back shed and checked the roofline for sagging. Eleanor, against her usual preference for solitude, brewed a second mug of coffee and poured a cup for him when he came in. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that wasn't awkward, just quiet. Maple lifted her head at Travis's scent, but didn't growl or retreat. One of the pups let out a tiny bark and rolled off, its sibling in protest. Travis chuckled. "They're fighters," he said softly. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You know dogs?" "I used to." He took a slow sip. "Was a firefighter back in Helena. We had a rescue station. Worked with animal units sometimes. There was this old retriever, Wallace. Saved 3 kids once in a fire. Died a week later from smoke inhalation. Still think about that dog." His voice didn't waver, but something in the way he held the mug, knuckles tight, told Eleanor more than words. "What brings you up here?" she asked. He gave a half shrug. "Things got complicated. Lost a couple people. House, too. Needed space." Jackson Hollow seemed quiet. Maybe too quiet. Eleanor let his words hang in the air. She understood better than most that pain didn't always need fixing. Sometimes it just needed room to breathe. "I've got a broken shed if you're looking for something to fix," she offered after a moment. "And a dog who doesn't trust people yet." Travis smiled, the first real one she'd seen. "I've worked with worse." Just then, a sudden thump came from the porch. Eleanor rose to check and opened the door to find a cat. A mottled, broad-shouldered tomcat with one ear missing and a notched tail, perched confidently on her steps. The creature blinked up at her, unbothered by the cold or by introductions. "Well, I'll be," Eleanor muttered. "That's Birch. Lives in the barn behind Miller's ranch. Shows up when he wants something." Travis chuckled again. "You've got quite the welcoming committee." Eleanor watched as Birch sauntered in without hesitation, heading straight for the stove and curling up with the ease of a returning king. Maple tensed slightly, but made no move. Birch ignored the pups entirely. Later that afternoon, as Travis made ready to leave, Eleanor stood on the porch with a thermos she had filled for him. "Come back tomorrow," she said, almost as an afterthought. "That shed really is leaning, and I could use another set of hands." Travis accepted the thermos, and for the first time in a long while, felt like he might belong somewhere again. "Thanks, Mrs. Whitmore." "Eleanor," she corrected softly. He nodded, then glanced toward the cabin's window, where Maple now lay with her chin on her paws, eyes watching. "And her." "Maple," she said. She named herself. The days that followed unfolded with a gentle rhythm, quiet as snowfall, steady as thaw. Outside Eleanor's cabin, Jackson Hollow remained wrapped in white, though the sky had shifted from bruised gray to something softer, pale blue streaked with streaks of peach at dusk. Winter had not yet loosened its grip, but there was a new softness to it now, like a fierce mother briefly letting down her guard. Inside the cabin, the air had changed too. The warmth from the wood stove was no longer a mere necessity, but a gentle pulse that animated the space. Maple, nestled in her bedding, had begun to eat regularly again. Her ribs, once stark beneath her matted coat, now slowly rounded. Her gait still carried a cautious limp, but she moved more freely each day, especially when Eleanor was near. The pups had opened their eyes, each a different shade of wonder. The black one, the boldest, had started pawing at Eleanor's boots. The cream-colored pup, smaller and more hesitant, often crawled into Maple's fur. The gray twins, inseparable, waddled together like explorers discovering firelight. They'd begun venturing a few steps beyond their nest, circling the stove, toppling over each other in clumsy delight. Maple remained wary of Travis. She did not growl or retreat as she had with Birch, the tomcat, but her gaze lingered on him with quiet scrutiny. Only when Eleanor sat nearby would she let him approach within arm's length. Travis understood. He never rushed. He spoke softly, let Maple observe him working, mending the shed door, patching the roofline, or bringing in fresh chopped wood. His presence became a fixture, his voice joining the crackle of the fire and the soft whimpers of pups learning to play. Eleanor had resumed an old habit, one she hadn't thought she'd return to. Her journal, once tucked away in a drawer beside the old photographs, now lay open each morning beside her tea. She wrote not in heavy prose, but in small observations, entries that marked the slow return of feeling. January 17th. Maple let me clean her paw without flinching. Travis says the limp might fade once the swelling settles. The pups yipped for the first time today. That little black one, Lord, he's got opinions. January 19th. Travis found a cracked tile onto the hearth. Said it reminded him of Helena, of a kitchen he used to know. He didn't elaborate. I didn't press. People come undone quietly. One morning, while Travis was on the ladder adjusting a bent rain gutter, a familiar voice called out from beyond the snow-dusted fence. Well, if this ain't a proper lumberjack scene. A woman stood beyond the gate, bundled in a maroon parka and a striped knit beanie. She was stout and broad-shouldered, her cheeks flushed from the cold, with hair like honey and a grin full of mischief. Good grief, Eleanor muttered, stepping onto the porch. Is that Claire Baldwin, or did the storm below in a circus? Claire Baldwin had been Eleanor's closest friend before Walter's death, a retired schoolteacher in her late 50s who lived 2 valleys over. Known in town for her booming laugh and unshakable opinions, Claire had given Eleanor space in the last 2 years, but never truly disappeared. She now approached the porch with a cover dish in one hand and a bag slung over her shoulder. "You're feeding strays again," Claire said, peering inside. "I thought you were done saving lost causes." Eleanor arched an eyebrow. "One of them can split logs. You want to stay useful in your old age, better bring pie." Claire laughed and swept into the cabin like a gust of personality. She bent down to inspect the pups, her face softening as she scratched behind Maple's ear, surprisingly tolerated. "Well, aren't you a little battalion?" she whispered. Travis soon joined them, brushing snow from his coat. Claire eyed him with a glint of curiosity. "You the stray Eleanor took in, or just the handyman?" Travis grinned. "A bit of both, I suppose." They spent the afternoon drinking weak coffee and laughing at Claire's stories of teaching 4th graders to spell the word photosynthesis in the middle of winter. For the first time in years, the cabin echoed with sound, not just noise but life. Birch observed the proceedings from the windowsill, tail flicking as though passing silent judgment. After Claire left, promising to return with marmalade scones and a second-hand dog bed, Eleanor stood quietly by the fire. Travis was kneeling beside the pups, watching as the bold black one gnawed uselessly at a shoelace. "You ever think about names?" he asked. "For the dogs?" "For all of them," he replied. "They're going to need them someday." Eleanor hesitated, then smiled. "The black one's clearly a troublemaker. I was thinking, maybe Jasper. The small cream girl might be Lily. The twins, Ash and Dusty." Travis nodded approvingly. "Fitting." He looked up at Maple, who watched the conversation with quiet interest. "And her, she already has her name," Eleanor said. "She's Maple. Always was." That night, after Travis had gone and the pups had drifted into tiny dreams, Eleanor sat by the window, pen in hand. January 22nd. Claire brought laughter. Travis brought silence. Maple brought both. I didn't know I needed them, but they fit. Like thaw beneath snow, nothing dramatic. Just returning. The morning began with stillness, a deceptive calm. The kind of hush that came before something wild. Thin flakes swirled like whispered omens across the open field behind Eleanor's cabin, dusting the woodpile and icing the windows in fine lace. By noon, the wind began to howl, not in steady breaths but in wild, fractured sobs. Jackson Hollow was no stranger to winter storms, but this one came with a ferocity Eleanor hadn't felt in years. She moved around the cabin with a practiced urgency, laying extra logs near the stove, sealing the window cracks with wool runners, and filling pans and buckets with water. The power would go soon. She could feel it in her bones. Outside, Maple paced near the door, her instincts stirred. She had taken to watching the wind, her body tense with an unease that mirrored Eleanor's. The pups, now bounding clumsily across the living room rug, barked playfully, unaware of the pressure building in the air. By mid-afternoon, the power cut out with a familiar pop and sigh. The light overhead flickered once, then died. Eleanor lit the kerosene lamp on the mantel and placed another near the kitchen. Her breath fogged in the air near the windows, and she knew the cold would creep in fast now. It was when she stepped out the back door to check the old tool shed, half buried in snow, nestled near the tree line, that the storm's true teeth revealed themselves. The wind lashed sideways, nearly taking the door off its hinges. Snow blinded her in seconds, but she pushed forward, stubborn as ever, her scarf tied tight, boots crunching through the waist-high drifts. What she hadn't seen was the slick patch of ice just past the fence post. Her boots slipped. A flash of pain, a heavy thud, and then the world tilted. Eleanor lay still, snow swallowing her shape as quickly as it had taken the light. Her ankle screamed with a sharpness that confirmed the worst, twisted or broken. The shed loomed just feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. She tried calling out, but the storm tore the sound from her throat. All she could do was wait, her breath coming faster, slower, faster again. The cold began to seep past her coat, coiling into her bones. Her fingers curled inward, trembling. Back in the cabin, Maple waited. The door had blown shut behind Eleanor and hadn't reopened. Something was wrong. For the past few weeks, Maple had observed everything. The way Eleanor cradled the pups, how she smiled without sound when Travis entered, how she hummed old songs while staring into firelight. She had learned these rhythms and felt their sudden rupture like a wire snapped. She stood, nose pressed to the door, tail still. Then, without a sound, she turned and ran to the front of the cabin. The wind whipped against her flanks, but she darted through it, snow clinging to her paws. She followed scent, memory, instinct. Travis's cabin sat 3/4 of a mile away, nestled behind a rise near Old Hollow Creek. The storm had erased the path, but Maple knew the way. Inside, Travis had just finished sealing his last window with blankets when he saw her. She appeared like a ghost at the edge of his porch, ears flat, chest heaving, eyes wild. Her bark was sharp, urgent. She turned and barked again, then ran a few feet before stopping, glancing back. Travis understood immediately. He grabbed his coat, flashlight, and medical bag. No hesitation. They battled the storm together, man and dog. Maple led, sometimes lost beneath the swirling white, only her dark ears and tail breaking the sea of snow. Travis followed, boots sinking deep, chest burning, heart thudding not from exertion, but from fear. He knew this was no small thing. When they found her, Eleanor's skin was pale and her eyes fluttering. Maple whined low, nuzzling her coat as Travis knelt beside her. "It's okay," he said. "You're all right. I've got you." He wrapped her in his coat and lifted her as gently as he could. Her ankle was already swelling. Maple circled them like a sentinel, her bark softened now, the danger found and fading. Back in the warmth of Eleanor's cabin, Travis laid her on the couch and built the fire back to life. The pups whined, gathered near the hearth. Maple curled beside Eleanor's feet, unmoving. When the worst of the pain had passed and Eleanor had drunk the tea Travis forced in her hands, there was quiet again, deep, ringing quiet, broken only by the crackle of pine logs. "I was foolish," Eleanor whispered hoarsely. "That shed's not worth a damn." "You're stubborn," Travis said gently, setting the tea down. "It's why you're still here." She gave a breath that might have been a laugh. "I owe you," she said. And her. Travis didn't answer immediately. He sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "Something I haven't said out loud in a while." Eleanor nodded. "I had a partner, back when I was still a firefighter in Helena. Name was Evan. He was," Travis paused, eyes far away, "the kind of guy who kept everyone laughing, even when the world was burning. We went into a house once, kids trapped inside. He didn't come back out. The fire popped softly. I made it to the porch, carrying one of the kids. Turned back for him. But the roof, it collapsed before I could reach him. I hear it still. The moment. The sound." He looked up. "I left the department a year after. Couldn't stand the silence in the locker room. Couldn't stand the silence in me." Eleanor reached out, rested her hand on his. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were steady. "You didn't leave the fire, Travis," she said. "You just started tending a different one." The storm raged on through the night, but inside that small cabin, something quiet had anchored itself. A dog who'd once been abandoned, a man who'd once been broken, and a woman who'd once believed her days of rescue were over. They sat like that for a long time, 3 lives stitched together by survival, healing in the most unexpected of seasons. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape sculpted in soft whites and glassy silence. Snow clung to pine branches like lace, the drifts now molded into smooth curves by the wind's retreat. Inside Eleanor's cabin, however, the world had shifted again, not because of the storm, but because of what had survived it. The pups had grown fast, the way life often does after hardship. Jasper, once the tiniest and boldest, had become a blur of black energy, always tumbling across the rug in pursuit of Dusty's tail. Lily remained gentle and observant, often pressing herself against Maple's side as if to listen to her heartbeat. Ash had developed a curious streak, often found chewing corners of boots or attempting to sneak under the stove. Each had their own sound, their own gait, their own way of saying, "I am alive. Watch me." Maple, stronger now, carried herself with quiet grace. Her coat had thickened, the fur no longer clinging in tangled knots, but brushed smooth each evening by Eleanor's careful hands. The limp still lingered, but it no longer slowed her. She had begun sleeping at Eleanor's feet rather than curled in a guarded corner, and sometimes, on cold mornings, she would gently nudge Eleanor's hand awake with her nose. Eleanor had begun posting photos, something she hadn't done in years. Her old social media page, long dormant, flickered back to life with snapshots of 4 muddy-pawed pups in various states of mischief. She didn't post captions, only dates and short observations. February 6th. Ash learned the hard way that shoes don't taste like biscuits. February 9th. Maple refused to let Lily out of her sight. Love is loud and silent, both. It wasn't long before messages started coming in. One afternoon, just after feeding time, there was a knock on the door, a brisk, rhythmic knock, the kind of knock that suggested practicality wrapped in a clipboard. Eleanor opened the door to a woman standing in a navy parka, wind-blown hair tucked beneath a fleece-lined cap. She was in her early 40s, lean and tall, with sharp features softened by years of tired kindness. "Ms. Whitmore," the woman asked. "My name's Rachel Merritt. I work with Silver Valley Rescue. We saw the pups online and wondered if we might help with adoption, vaccinations, anything you need." Eleanor nodded slowly. "They've drawn quite a crowd, haven't they?" Rachel smiled, stepping inside when invited. She moved like someone used to navigating unpredictable spaces, shelters, barns, storms. Her brown eyes scanned the cabin with gentle curiosity, taking in the firewood stacked near the hearth, the water bowls lined up in a neat row, and the 4 pups tumbling across the floor like wind-up toys. Rachel knelt down to greet them, and to Eleanor's surprise, none shied away. Even Lily approached, sniffing Rachel's glove before licking it once. But Maple stood between them, not aggressive, simply present. Her body stiffened slightly, and she fixed her amber eyes on Rachel with a calm that said, "I know who we are. You need to know, too." "She's protective," Eleanor said, voice low. "She's a good mother," Rachel replied, her voice equally soft. "I've seen dogs snap. She's not snapping. She's reading me." Rachel stayed an hour, took notes, snapped photos, and promised to send over some essentials: puppy pads, food, and vaccine records. As she left, she paused on the porch. "When they're ready, we'll find them homes that fit. No ruse. But if you change your mind about Maple—" "I won't," Eleanor said, firm but kind. Rachel didn't press. "Then she's already home." That night, Eleanor watched Maple as the pups fell asleep in a heap. The fire cast long shadows across the walls, and the wind had taken on a gentler tune. She reached down, touched Maple's head, and whispered, "You don't have to leave. This isn't a stop along the way. It's a door that stays open." Maple didn't move, only leaned her weight slightly into Eleanor's palm. Meanwhile, Travis had been working quietly on something of his own. The old barn on his father's land had been rotting from neglect for years. After his father passed, the property had sat quiet, too many memories in too small a space. But Eleanor's resilience and Maple's quiet defiance had stirred something inside him. It began with a sketch on a napkin, a rough idea of an open space with kennels, warmth, and room to heal. He cleared the barn by hand, removing debris, hauling out rusted tools. The roof was repaired by sheer stubbornness and a few bruised knuckles. Claire even dropped off an old wheelbarrow and a toolbox with a sticky note: "Real men ask for help. Real women ignore that and help anyway." Travis called it Hollow Haven, a small rehabilitation center for abandoned or injured animals. Not a grand facility, but a beginning. He brought Eleanor there one morning to show her. She stood in the middle of the space, floor still half dirt, tools scattered, and looked around with eyes damp from something too old to name. "You built this because of her," she said. "No," Travis replied, adjusting the collar of his jacket. "Because of you both." Eleanor reached out, gripping his arm. "I thought my days of building were over." "Turns out," Travis said with a half smile, "hope's a bit stubborn too." The following week, Eleanor called the county office. It took 3 forms, 1 fax, and a grumpy clerk in town, but by the end of it, Maple Whitmore had a collar, a tag, and a name in the records. "You're not just mine," Eleanor told her. "You're ours. We rescued each other. You and me and these muddy little miracles." Spring came slowly to Jackson Hollow, not in great bursts but in small, stubborn gestures. The snow receded in patchwork patches, unveiling the dark, damp soil beneath. Birds returned first, warblers and wrens with urgent voices, and then came the green. Shoots of crocus and daffodil pushed through the softened earth, and in Eleanor's modest garden, the first buds of white narcissus bloomed. They stood in careful rows, planted long ago by Walter, whose steady hands had once held each bulb like a quiet promise. Eleanor knelt among them one morning, her knees in the soft mud, brushing dirt from a new bloom. She smiled, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Across the hollow, the newly named Maple Haven came alive. What began as Travis's sketch dream had become something more, something needed. Word had spread from Rachel Merritt's rescue center to nearby shelters and rural farms. Maple Haven now received animals from across the region. Dogs with frostbitten paws, barn cats abandoned after foreclosures, even a sheepdog named Toby, gray and anxious, whose owner had passed and left him wandering dirt roads near Large Creek. Toby was nearly 10, with clouded eyes and a shaggy coat that clung to the last of winter. He was shy, often found pressed against corners, but he responded to calm voices and warm soup. One of the new volunteers, a soft-spoken young woman named Isla Greer, spent her afternoons reading aloud beside him. Isla was barely 22, short with cropped russet hair and eyes the color of lake stones. She had a tremble in her hands, an aftermath of a childhood illness, and spoke little, but animals trusted her, and Toby followed her now like a shadow. Maple Haven operated out of the restored barn and a connected lean-to structure Travis had built over weeks of sweat and splinters. It was modest, 5 kennels, 3 holding crates aloft for hay and supplies, but it was warm, reliable, and above all, safe. Rachel visited twice a week to coordinate adoptions and update medical charts. She brought along her new assistant, Jonas, a lanky, bearded man with a sun-faded ball cap and a coffee addiction, who had the habit of talking to cats like they were accountants. Each week, a few more animals found homes, including 3 of Maple's pups. Jasper went first to a retired trucker named Hank who lived alone but always wanted a companion to ride in his Ford. Dusty was adopted by a school librarian who brought him to reading hours, where he promptly became a celebrity. Lily found her place with a widowed mother and her 2 daughters, who slept beside her on a pile of pillows every night since. Ash remained. He had grown into a lean, gray-furred streak of intelligence and loyalty. Always watching, always thinking, and always returning to Eleanor's lap, curling there with a sigh that seemed far older than his months. No adoption form ever felt right. One couple tried, but Ash simply refused to go with them, standing stiff at the cabin door, tail low, eyes unreadable. Eleanor knew, even before they drove away, he had chosen. By April, the garden bloomed with purpose. Eleanor had restored the bird feeders, and finches gathered again like gossipers. Maple slept in the sun now, belly up, fully surrendered to safety. And Ash, he had taken up a self-appointed post as squirrel patrol and Travis's morning greeting party. Each dawn, as Travis made his way down from the ridge, Ash waited on the porch steps, tail wagging, ears perked. No alarm clock could match him. One evening, after a long day tending to an injured beagle and building a new fence, Travis joined Eleanor on the porch. He brought lemonade and a small, chipped radio that played quiet country tune from a station across the state line. They didn't speak much, didn't need to. Maple lay at Eleanor's feet, Ash beside her, both content. The sun dipped low, casting golden light over the daffodils and the trees beyond. Birds rustled above, and the wind whispered through the new leaves. Travis glanced toward her, then the land stretching beyond. "Funny thing," he said. "I spent so long running from places. Thought quiet meant emptiness, but here just means peace." Eleanor tilted her head, eyes soft. "Quiet holds more than noise ever could." He nodded, watching Ash stretch out his legs. "I think I finally stopped needing to be useful to feel like I belong." Eleanor looked out across her garden, the blooms catching the last light. "Maybe belonging isn't about doing," she said. "Maybe it's about staying." There was a long pause, filled only by the crickets beginning their song and the distant hoot of an owl just waking up. "You think Maple knows she's home?" Travis asked. Eleanor smiled. "I think she knew before any of us." As night settled, porch lights flickered on, casting halos around the steps. Birch, the barn cat, jumped up to claim his perch beside the rocking chair, yawning as though the world finally made sense. Toby, the older sheepdog, curled near the garden's edge, and from the trees, the stars began to bloom. Inside the house, the journal lay open again on Eleanor's kitchen table. April 28th, Jasper rides shotgun, Dusty reads with third graders, Lily shares tea parties. And Ash guards this porch like it's the last holy place. We didn't build a shelter. We built a promise. And under it, a final line. This isn't where the story ends. It's where we finally stopped surviving and started living. Sometimes, the ones who need saving the most come to save us. In the quiet spaces between loss and love, we often find unexpected family, whether they walk on 2 legs or 4. This story reminds us that healing doesn't always happen loudly. Sometimes it grows in warmth, in patience, and in the courage to stay. If this touched your heart, leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Type them in if you believe every soul deserves a second chance. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs a little hope today. God bless you, and may every act of kindness find its way back to you.